Hello, CorpsCon23 attendees, and welcome to today's workshop, Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. My name is Bobby Tillett. I am the Senior Manager for Member Services and Technical Assistance at the Core Network, and I'm very excited to welcome you to today's important session. We hope that you'll jump in and engage with your fellow attendees in either the chat window or the Q&A feature. In the chat window, you can message with the other attendees who are watching alongside you. In the Q&A feature, you can answer questions posted by our presenter or post your own questions for the presenter to answer. All the session materials will also be available in the session description underneath this video. I'm really excited to welcome our presenter for today, Harry Bruell, who's the current president and CEO with PathPoint. Prior to his work there, he was the president and CEO at Conservation Legacy, a core program based in Durango, Colorado that helps to oversee 7 different cores across the country. Harry has been a leader in the core movement for many, many years, and he's also the winner of this year's Legacy Achievement Award. With that, I am excited to pass it over to Harry Bruell.
Really happy to be here with you all. It's been a little while since I've been with the cores, but cores are always deep in my heart, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you about mental wellness and suicide prevention. And I appreciate that the cores are caring about these issues, and the core network has made space for this at the conference. And that cores and all of you are here and listening to this presentation, and hopefully can take away a few things that will be helpful. And maybe also realize that you're probably already doing a lot of things that are making a difference. So thanks for joining this journey with me. As I thought about this, I thought the best way for me to talk about it is talk a little bit about my personal journey. And I'll give you a warning, there is some thoughts about suicide in there. So pre-warning. And then walking through sort of these 5 questions that I had after our family's experience. And I think there is space for cores in all of them, and things that directly impact the work that you're all doing. So we'll go through those. We'll share some tools. There'll be a couple times for you to do a little bit of work in the middle of this. And then we'll end with some resources and kind of putting it all together. So here we go. A little bit about my background, and Bobby talked about that. I spent a little over 25 years in the core world, in your world. I did have hair at one point. That's me probably in 1991 or 1992, my first core job at the Durham, North Carolina Service Corps for a few years. And then I worked at the Core Network for 10 years when it was called NASC, before Bobby got there, but when Leslie was there and others. And then I spent the last 13 years at Conservation Legacy in Colorado. The last few years that I was with the Core Network were challenging because my daughter, Taya, started having some mental health challenges. And we had a hard time getting help and getting diagnoses. And she ended up dying of suicide when she was 14, a few days before the Core Network's national conference in 2016. And it's been a difficult road for us afterwards. We were very public of how she died because this was an important piece, and we didn't want to not talk about it. And I had been expected at the national conference and had some speaking roles, and so we just said this is what happened. And what surprised me was a lot of people started coming up to me afterwards and talking about mental illness and mental health challenges with their kids or with their siblings or with their parents or with their friends. And I finally counted up, and I'm sure that I missed some, but there were 35 different people who had told me stories about their families and mental illness, and I had never knew about. And at the same time, a lot of people didn't know what was going on with us. So we still kind of are working through, it's been 7 years, and it's a lifetime of work, of getting through and dealing with grief and the impact of what happened in our family. I did have some changes, and this is when I left Conservation Legacy about a year after Taya died and went to PathPoint, which is an organization that supports people with mental health diagnoses and developmental and intellectual disabilities. I wrote a book about our story because our daughter had borderline personality disorder but wasn't diagnosed, because a lot of clinicians won't diagnose kids with that. So we're making the case for that diagnosis, and wanted to sort of help others and work on this this journey, which really became my purpose after Taya. So here are the questions that I had that I think have some impact for the work that you all do. First, how prevalent are mental health challenges with today's young people? And I'm sure you've all heard more. There's been a lot more on the news in the last couple of years, but I wanted to dig into that a little bit. Secondly, what can we do immediately? How can we help right now when someone is struggling? And as you'll see, there are, and I'm sure you see it in your work, lots of people struggling every day. The next question, number 3, is how do we sort of get in front of this? How can we do something before people are in crisis, before they're struggling? Number 4 is specific about the suicide crisis. What can we do about that? And then 5 is there anything else we can do? So let's dig into these questions. First, what's going on today with young people? How prevalent are these? So here's some of the data, and I'm sure you've seen pieces of this, but 1 out of 3 young adults the age of Corps members had a mental illness last year. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for 10 to 34-year-olds. Half of mental illnesses begin by age 14 and 3/4 by the age of 24. So people who develop mental illnesses often do it when they're the age of Corps members. In California, mental health is the number 1 reason kids are hospitalized. Related to mental illness in many places is substance abuse. And you may have seen this, that we've now in the past year lost 100,000 Americans to drug overdoses. A third of Corps member age people binge drink monthly, 40% use drugs. And if you didn't see it, the Surgeon General issued an advisory on youth mental health last year. That's pretty amazing. And then in the middle of this, we had the pandemic. During the pandemic, 1 in 4 young people, age of Corps members, 18 to 24, seriously considered suicide. 1 out of 4. In California, 1 out of 3 high school students experience poor mental health, most or all of the time. And half of all high school students experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. Emergency department visits for suspected suicide among girls rose 50% nationally in 2021. The CDC just came out with this data. You may have seen it. 60% of teen girls felt persistently sad or hopeless in their most recent report. Depression rates among college students doubled to 61%, 6 out of 10 college students. This last one I thought was interesting. When everything was being shut down, the Las Vegas schools reopened early because they had 18 students die of suicide. So they figured it was better to open the schools during COVID than to keep having that happen. I know some of you work with veterans. So just some info about veterans here. 41% veterans health patients have a mental health or substance use disorder. In the last 22 years, 114,000 veterans have died by suicide. In the last 15 years, there's been an 86% increase in the suicide rate of 18 to 34-year-old male vets, the age of typically of the people in Corps who are veterans. And veterans have a 50% higher risk of suicide. And we'll get a little more into why that is later on. So if you look at your typical crew, and apologies for the fuzziness of that photo, but maybe that's sort of appropriate. But if you have a crew of 10 people in a Corps, this is what you follow the statistics. 6 of those 10 suffer from depression. 5 of them experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. That's half your crew. 4 use drugs, 3 binge drink regularly, 3 have a mental illness, and 2 to 3 of them are seriously considering suicide right now. That's what the data says. So this is what we're dealing with. This is what you're dealing with. Hopefully this is why you're here in this session, to learn more about what we can do. Which leads, of course, to our next question is, what can we do immediately to deal with this? So what Corps have always done is first aid and CPR. And my guess is most of you train all of your crew leaders and maybe even some of your Corps members in first aid and CPR. Good things to do. Keep doing it. But what about mental health conditions? So there is something analogous that's called mental health first aid. Some of you may know about it. Some of you may have done it. Just like regular first aid, mental health first aid is the initial help given to someone developing a mental health or substance use problem or someone in crisis. The first aid, mental health first aid, just like regular first aid, you give it until treatment and support are received or until the crisis is over. So it's the same concept of what Corps have been doing for a long, long time, but on the mental health side. There have been a number of peer-reviewed studies on mental health first aid and show it to be highly effective. Folks who have completed mental health first aid have demonstrated confidence in helping someone with a mental health challenge. And this is, I think, really important. They were much more likely to help, because so much what happens with mental health is we ignore it. Or we say, boy, I don't know what to do. Or I shouldn't ask that person if they're thinking about suicide. Or I shouldn't bring it up because it'll make them sad. And mental health first aid gives the tools to have those really, really important conversations. These are the things that someone will learn in mental health first aid. The risk factors and warning signs. So what are the various mental health conditions? Things like depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosis, substance abuse. What are warning signs and risk factors that you see on those? Most importantly, this 5-step action plan that I'll talk a little bit about next, and then a whole bunch of resources that can help folks know what to do. So this is the action plan that they talk about. Anybody who's taken the course remembers ALGE. That's their acronym. But this is what they really focus on in mental health first aid: assessing the risk of suicide or harm, listening non-judgmentally, which is so important because so much with mental health is stigma, and stigma comes to making judgments early. So listening non-judgmentally, giving reassurance, giving information, encouraging appropriate professional help, and encouraging self-help and other support strategies. So for folks who take a class, this is kind of what you really learn. In terms of the class, it's sort of very similar to regular first aid, where the class is just one day, typically about 8 hours. So you can go through the class and get training. You can also have your Corps members or crew leaders become trained as trainers and train others. At my organization a couple of years ago, we got 5 of our staff trained, and then they've been training not only all of our other staff, but the individuals that we support in our programs as well. So that's the first question. What can we do right now? And this is something that you can do immediately. And there's a link there to the organization that provides this, and I'll have the links at the end. And I think there's a place within the Corps network that these presentations will be saved, which will have all the links and information. So my second question is, how can we prevent? So how do we go sort of further upstream? And I really like the kind of concept here that, boy, can we get further upstream? Can we help some of these issues before they develop? And I know after our daughter, we've spent lots and lots of time going back. What could we have done? What could we have done? And we have to keep going further and further upstream to figure out when we could have made a difference early on. So I spent a lot of time after we lost her looking at various options in curriculum, different interventions, what could be done. And I'm going to talk about one that I found to be extremely helpful. there are many out there. And so you should certainly look, and in the resources, I have another one listed, but there are more, and you should spend your time and think about it. But I'll focus on this one for now, which is dialectical behavior therapy, but a piece of it. Dialectical behavior therapy is and goes by DBT. It's based on skill building, acceptance, mindfulness. It was developed by an amazing woman named Marsha Linehan. And it really focuses on this idea of dialectics. And dialectics are the two opposite ideas can be true at the same time. And when you put them together, you have a new truth and a new way of viewing a situation. And if you look at that picture, you see an object that, depending which side you're looking at it, looks very different, but it's the same object. And that's the idea of dialectics. We can look at things, we can consider things that are different, but they can both be true. And that's an interesting concept, especially for a young person. Now, DBT has therapy and it has skill building. And what I found amazing and what really turned me on to this is this group out of New York City called Cognitive Behavioral Consultants that are teaching the skill part of DBT universally, meaning to every student in a high school or middle school. And they're now in 100 schools in the New York area, a few scattered around the country, focusing on emotional regulation, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness. And this is something that can be done in CORS. And we did it at PathPoint at my organization as well. This is one high school that did this for 9 years. And before they started, this is in Portland, Oregon, Lincoln High School, suicide was the leading cause of death. There are 1 to 2 suicides per year. 13% students considered suicide, 2% attempted. They also had 2 placements into Portland's day treatment classroom per year. After doing the DBT program, they had in 9 years 0 suicides. So right there, to me, it sold me, because that's 9 to 18 lives changed, lives saved, and many, many more lives changed by folks who were impacted. They also had only 1 placement in 9 years into their day treatment instead of 2 a year. So from 18 to 1, and that 1 was returned in 2 weeks. So a pretty powerful demonstration of the impact of what this did in a high school. And knowing core members at times are older, I don't think it matters. It's the same principles. And I've even seen, as I've been learning some of these, that it's had an impact in my own life and my own work. So the core dialect of DBT is this thing, which when you think about this, it's very radical, but you have to really think. It's acceptance and change. It's the fact of I'm accepted for who I am and I can change. And that's a hard concept, because typically therapy is you need to change, right? And this is acceptance and change. And that's a very powerful, powerful message and a powerful piece of it. So this is how this program works. It's 16 weeks. It's less than an hour a week. It's basically a 1-hour session. There's a book that has everything in it, agendas, homework, worksheets. Can be done in a classroom. I think it could even be done in the grade for a camping program. You could bring this out and do it around the campfire once a week. Could also, for programs that send core members into schools, you could train your core members to do this in the schools with students. It has 4 pieces: mindfulness, distress tolerance. What do I do when I get angry? Such an important thing. When something's not working for me, how do I manage that? Just that skill alone could save so much conflict and heartache. Emotional regulation. How do I manage my emotions? And interpersonal effectiveness. How do I work better with others? How do I ask for what I need? How do I make sure my views are being part of things? So many important skills. So here are some resources, and these, again, they'll be at the end, and hopefully you can get the presentation if you're interested, and download and get into these. All right, the next question, and this one, there's going to be a little work for you. So we're going to have you do a little work. If this was the real live presentation at the conference, we'd be breaking into small groups and doing some work here, but we'll do a little self-work during this piece. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. So the question is, what can we do about the suicide crisis? And I've thought a lot about this one too. And I've read a lot and looked a lot and tried to understand it. And the best understanding I could find is a guy named Thomas Joyner, who's a professor at University of Florida. He lost his father to suicide. He's written a couple books, and he's put together this, what he calls the interpersonal psychological theory of suicide behavior. But it makes a lot of sense to me. And it's this sort of massive Venn diagram with three different things going on. So the top two, let's talk about those. The first is thwarted belongingness, feeling alone. I'm not connected. I'm alone. I don't have friends. I don't connected to my family. Feeling alone is the top one. On the right side is perceived burdensomeness. I'm a burden. I'm not helping. It'd be better off without me. Those two together, being alone, and feeling like a burden, produce a desire for suicide. But not everybody who feels alone or feels like they're a burden dies of suicide or attempts. The bottom one is the capability for suicide, the ability to inflict lethal self-harm. And that comes from I'm not afraid to die. And that's where we talked about veterans. That's where veterans fit. That's where doctors fit, especially emergency room doctors. That's where first responders fit. Frankly, that's where anyone who's been around trauma. So our core members who grew up in an area with a lot of trauma, who may have seen family members get killed, who may have seen friends die, who may have been shot at, anything like that can go into that last bucket of I'm not afraid to die. So what can cores do? I'll talk about the bad news first. The bad news is the bottom one, that I'm not afraid to die. There's nothing we can do. If someone has had that kind of trauma in their life or has been in that kind of experience, there's nothing they can do. That's there, it's hardwired. The good news is we can do something about the first two. And this is where you're already doing a lot of things, because you're a conservation corps or service corps or AmeriCorps. And the first piece about being alone, well, you're part of a group serving together. And about perceived burdensomeness, feeling a burden, well, you engage people to have meaning in their life through service. So there are things you're doing there, but let's get more specific about it. So if you think about the thwarted belongingness, the feeling of being alone, what I'm going to do is give you a couple minutes here to think about this. What can you do at your program to even more make sure that your core members, and I would go to your crew supervisors, your crew leaders, even some of your staff, do not feel that they're alone? So I'm going to mute myself for 2 minutes and ask for you to think about this and think about what you might be able to do, and then I'll share my list. So here we go. About 1 more minute. All right. Great. Well, hopefully you got a really good list. I bet your list is probably better than mine, but I'll share mine because I can't share yours. So here are some of the things that I thought about for helping people to not feel alone. Uh, Inclusive policies, especially around diversity, equity, DEI, inclusiveness, and access. Building esprit de corps, which I know many of you do in many different ways. Outlawing clicks. I know some programs have that where people are not allowed to click off, or you can't have exclusive relationships on a crew. Planned activities at downtime and days off. So this is one, if you're a spike program and people have some days off together, is making sure there are some planned activities for folks to do together and making sure people aren't kind of being stuck and nowhere to go for 2 or 3 days. And even for others, if there are, for instance, you have a break in the middle of the day, can you have a game that includes everybody, or a way to pull folks in if people are wandering off? Some programs have done assigned buddy systems. When you start, you get connected to someone right off the bat, and 2 people are put together as buddies. Or if it's a program that has rolling admissions, you have mentors. Tent mates assigned. So again, we're not clicking people off. Structured group activities, evening activities, if it's a camping program, afternoon or even after work, if it's a day program. And then I think I really like this idea someone had of reaching out individually to anyone left out. So making sure you have sort of a regular check-in with individuals, that you have some time to spend to make sure people are feeling heard, that you know what's going on with them, caring about them. Even if it's a 10-minute check-in once a week can make a big difference. All right, let's talk about the next one, which is someone feeling that they're a burden. So again, I'm going to give you a couple minutes and ask that you write down what ideas you have at your core that you could go in and help make sure that people don't feel that they are a burden. Corps members, crew leaders, staff. 2 minutes. Just about 1 more minute. All right. Hopefully you got a good list. Again, I bet it's better than my list, but I'll share mine with you. Here's some of the things that I thought about. And some of these I bet you're already doing. Service celebrations, awards to Corps members for recognizing their contribution, directly connecting with the service recipients. Some of that happens already, right? But making an extra effort to find trail users or meet with the land manager, with the whole crew, or if you're tutoring students, have connections with the parents. Skill building and certifications. One way to not feel like a burden is to learn a skill and be recognized for it and feel like, okay, here's something where I can contribute. Appropriate roles on the crew where everyone can shine. I'm less of a proponent that everybody has to do every role in a crew. If someone's really good at something and someone else is really good at something else, why not let them become a master and really feel proficient at something and feel really good about it than putting people in roles that they may not thrive in. When it's appropriate, rotating the leadership with the caveat that maybe not everybody wants to try that, but giving folks who can that opportunity, because that's another sort of empowering piece. And again, I really like the individual check-ins and even doing some goal setting for this one. What are things you want to learn? Where are things you want to contribute? Measuring progress so they can see how well they've done, what they've learned, what they've done, what they've contributed. So a number of different things. My guess is you have a really good list to both of these, and you're probably already doing a lot of them, but maybe there's a few other things you can do that will help in this way. All right, the last question, what else can we do on this? And I have an answer to this that my guess is many of you are doing, but it's a simple one in a way. It's practicing kindness, because there's a lot of great information with practicing kindness and its impact on mental health. It has impact on depression and anxiety, which are two of the biggest mental health conditions, as well as stress. Anxiety, they did a study and found that people with they were highly anxious, did 6 acts of kindness a week. And after a month, their mood was more positive. They had more satisfaction in their relationships and a decrease in social avoidance. On depression, doing acts of kindness and being kind reduced depression. And it also lowered stress for folks. So many good things to be done with kindness. And here's the final chance for you to think about what you can do. I've promised we won't do this again, but I'll give you 2 minutes to sort of think about what are ways you can promote kindness at your core. And then I'll share my list, again, thinking yours is going to be probably better, but here we go, 2 minutes, and then we'll be back. One more minute on kindness. All right. Well, as always, your list is probably better than mine, but here we go. Here's some of the things that I thought about. One is making it an official part of your values and your culture. I know at our organization, we talk about kindness all the time. In fact, I talk about CREC, KREC, kindness, respect, empathy, and compassion. And we bring that up even in very difficult conversations with the thought that kindness is clear. Brene Brown piece that being kind is telling people the truth, being clear on what's going on. But that's part of kindness. Kindness is also bringing up concerns in a way that is respectful. We want concerns brought up. We want to have open dialogue, but we want to do it respectfully. So part of the culture. The second, something we also do at PathPoint is send out a email every Monday morning called the Monday Morning Kindness, where we have some story of some kind activity, either something within our own organization or something out in the world, usually focused on mental health or disabilities, but not always. I've seen places where there's a kindness wall, and this picture is sort of could be one of those where people can put up sticky notes of various things they saw going on that promote kindness. A fourth one is having appreciations at the end of team meetings or crew meetings or staff meetings. I did that years ago in an organization I ran, and it was the most impactful part of the meeting. And many of our programs now do that with their staff meetings, where anyone can sort of appreciate anyone else in the group for something that went on during the week or during the month or whatever the time period is during the hitch. And even having some awards or recognitions around kindness. So this wasn't recorded. I would love to hear yours, but I'm sure we'll get some good ones in the live session as well. So putting it all together. So here's where at the end, we kind of roll this up. Here's what I think CORS can do. Prevention, things like building skills, and DBT is one, and there'll be others that you could look at. Creating belongingness. You are so well positioned. CORE is a crew, is a cadre. You are so well positioned to create this sense of belongingness with folks. And fostering self-worth so folks don't feel like a burden. Again, a perfect place for CORS. Where else do we ask young people, 18, 16, 21, 23, and tell them you're a resource, you're really important, we need you in our community? That's what CORS do. So you can do a lot on the prevention side. On recognizing signs and taking action, I highly recommend mental health first aid as regular training for all core members, or at least all crew leaders and staff, but core members would be really good too. And then practicing kindness can go a long way to making change. Here are the resources. So these are all links, and hopefully these are things that you can access through the Core Network's site. Here's how to get hold of me. And let's go end some suffering and save some lives. Thanks so much. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for, I love the CORS, and I appreciate what you do for a living and what you do at your programs and what you do for young people. So thank you, and thanks for attending the session. And
Thank you, Harry, for walking us through that very important topic. If you have questions for Harry, you can feel free to post them in the Q&A features section to the right of this video. The session materials will also be open for the remainder of the conference. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at CorpsCon23.